Fierce fighting continues across Libya as pro-Gaddafi forces try to retake towns and cities from rebels. An armed British team has been allowed to leave Libya after being detained by opposition forces. Hello, fierce fighting is continuing across Libya with forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi mounting strong counterattacks as they try to retake opposition-controlled areas. In the west, tanks have been in action against the rebel-held cities of Zawiya and Misrata. In the east, Libyan opposition forces in Benghazi have detained 8 people, including soldiers, suspected to be from the British Special Forces. The BBC's Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, reports from Tripoli.
The shooting started before dawn. To begin with, military experts who heard it thought it sounded like a gunfight. But at first light, the regime said they were celebrating because of military victories. They claim to have completely destroyed rebel forces in Zawiya, 30 miles west of here, and captured other towns to the east. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi has some solid support in Tripoli, and it was out on the streets. The chant was God, Muammar, Libya, and nothing else.
These are people who absolutely believe Colonel Gaddafi's contention that the trouble's been started by Al-Qaeda and by foreigners who want Libya's oil and who want to recolonize the country. Government spokesmen are saying that total victory is coming. Next stop, Benghazi.
This was Green Square in the center of Tripoli. A medium-sized crowd, a couple of thousand perhaps, while the BBC was there. These are the true believers. The Gaddafi regime does appear to be recovering itself around the capital, but its position elsewhere is less secure and less certain. The claims of sweeping victories they're celebrating are not accurate. This is an attack by the regime's forces on Bin Jawad in the east. They're pushing on against the rebels who are fighting back. It's too soon to talk of victory for either side. Instead, as the fighting continues, the danger of a prolonged civil war increases. This crisis is not ending quickly or cleanly. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Tripoli.
Well, Dr. Sami Mohammed, who's in the Libyan city of Ajdabiya, that's south of Benghazi, told us about the latest developments there.
We were heading this morning to Ras Al City to check on the medical facilities there, but unfortunately we heard the news that there have been some conflicts and clashes in Bin Jawad city, so we stayed on the hospital to receive patients. Since this morning we received about 23 wounded patients. Some of them are critical and had to be referred to a more specialized medical facility in Benghazi, while others are still here. We're trying to manage them as much as we can.
So you're in Ajdabiya, and these casualties were there where you are?
Yes, the casualties have been coming from Bin Jawad. There have been rumors that some Libyan tribes made treason against their Libyan brothers in Bin Jawad. They were heading to capture the city of Bin Jawad. But most of the people, most of the injured people told us that there had been some kind of treason. We're not really sure what happened there, but it's dramatic.
So the people who have been hurt in these attacks, are these civilians who aren't participating in any fighting?
No. Most of the injured people took place in fighting at Bin Jawad city. They are civilians, but they are trying to capture the city.
Okay, and you mentioned tribal factors here at play, that there are now tribal rivalries and disputes playing out on the streets.
Exactly, but we're not really sure about the story behind it. But what we're sure of, that, like I told you, the injured people came here claiming that there was some kind of treason between some tribes, some Libyan tribes, that have been turned against them.
What is the sense that you get of who is in control in that area?
We're not really sure. I tried to ask some injured people here about the name of the tribes that made this such treason, but they're not really sure. They're investigating yet. The story is not really clear right now.
Dr. Samir Mohammed speaking to me from Ajdabiya. Well, an armed British team thought to include members of the Special Forces has left Libya by warship after being detained by opposition forces there. Witnesses said most of the 8-man group landed by helicopter on Friday near the eastern city of Benghazi.
A surprise return to Benghazi by HMS Cumberland. There's an obvious tension in the air. Evidence of the prolonged negotiations on board for the release of the British Special Forces team, held by the Libyan opposition, who now run this city. I understand a helicopter carrying the group and their equipment landed near Benghazi at 2 a.m. on Friday. They were met by 2 men, one a British national. 2 cars took them to a nearby compound. They were questioned and asked if they were carrying weapons. Guns, explosives and passports with multiple nationalities were discovered. At this point, the Britons were handcuffed and arrested. Later, in a further embarrassing development, Libyan state television broadcast what it said was a recording of a conversation between Britain's ambassador to Libya, Richard Northern, and an opposition spokesman. The ambassador is heard to say that the British team are in Libya to make contact with the opposition and to monitor the humanitarian situation.
I understand that there has been a misunderstanding and they have been picked up by a security group who are concerned about their presence and who they are. And I hope to ask Mr. Jalil if he might be able to intervene to help us clear up this misunderstanding.
Feelings are still running high here 2 weeks after the opposition expelled Colonel Gaddafi's troops. These signs have appeared across the city, discouraging foreign intervention. As these demonstrations on Friday show, the Libyan opposition are in determined mood, even as the world gives them ever stronger support. As HMS Cumberland left port tonight, the British government seems to have seriously miscalculated the reaction to a helicopter arriving with armed men in the middle of the night. John Lyne, BBC News, Benghazi, Libya.
In other news, at least 12 civilians, including 5 children, have been killed by a roadside bomb in eastern Afghanistan. President Karzai has condemned the blast, which happened in Paktika province near the border with Pakistan. It's an area that's been targeted by militants many times and is often used to attack US-led forces in Afghanistan. Chinese authorities have mounted a huge show of force in Beijing after renewed calls on the internet for protests. The anonymous messages had urged people to take an afternoon stroll at particular locations in major cities as a way of calling for change. An early morning fire in a nightclub in central Taiwan has killed 9 people and left 12 injured. The blaze in Taichung City is suspected to have been caused by an illegal performance using lit torches on stage. Sparks reportedly set the ceiling on fire, then quickly spread through the 2-story building, packed with partygoers. The 2 rivals claiming the presidency in Ivory Coast have been invited to join talks outside the country. The head of the African Union Commission, Jean Ping, made the offer after meeting Alassane Ouattara, who's recognised internationally as the winner of last year's election, and Laurent Gbagbo in Abidjan. Mr. Ouattara says he will attend the talks. Coming up next here on BBC World News, it's UK Report.
Hello there. For this forecast, I'll start across Africa, where we've got our usual tropical downpours, pretty wet as well towards Mozambique and Madagascar, and getting much colder and more unsettled this week across Egypt, with some heavy rain coming down from the eastern Mediterranean. Getting much colder, in fact, across the whole of southern and eastern Europe this week. Strong winds, much colder. A lot of dry weather further west, but I'm afraid for Madrid, we have got some rain on the way by the middle of the week. In fact, by the end of Tuesday, with low pressure moving in. Some showers around for Jeddah and for Riyadh. In fact, we've got some pretty nasty weather for the north to come. That again out of the Mediterranean, bringing cold and settled weather. We'll clear our unsettled weather away from Japan for some dry weather Tuesday, Wednesday. Even brightens up after some early dampness for Hong Kong, but lots of showers continuing through the tropics. As ever, there's plenty more weather information on our website.
From airline security to carbon offsetting, from couch surfing to controversy over roaming rates. If you want the very latest stories from the world of travel, join me, Fiona Foster and Rajan Datta on Fast Track every weekend here on BBC World News.
Confidence was slowly returning to the Middle East's markets after the region's debt crisis, but political and economic turmoil is threatening to derail that recovery. So what can be done to reassure investors? Find out here on BBC World News.
If you enjoy lively debate with some of the quickest minds...
That's not true. This goes right to the heart of a corruption in democracy.
With an international angle.
It's not brave, it's suicidal for a politician to take such drastic steps.
These are very interesting ideological times. I suspect you don't entirely agree with me.
Join me, Gavin Esler, for Dateline London.
Now on BBC World News, our weekly showcase of stories from the BBC's network of reporters and correspondents across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom.
The media deal of the decade. Rupert Murdoch gets the green light to take complete control of B-Sky B. He shot his brother 11 times. An inquest relives the horror of Derek Bird's killing spree in Cumbria. And Britain's X-Files finally opened, revealing reports of alien abductions and UFO sightings. Hello and welcome to UK Report, looking at the major British stories over the last 7 days. A former British soldier who killed 2 men while working as a security guard in Baghdad has been sentenced to life in prison. Danny Fitzsimmons claimed he'd shot the men during a drunken fight in 2009. He was the first Westerner to be put on trial in Iraq since the fall of Saddam Hussein. From Baghdad, Jonathan Head reports.
Danny Fitzsimmons walked into court knowing he faced a possible death sentence. He'd pleaded self-defence and diminished responsibility because of combat-related stress. The former soldier had admitted killing 2 colleagues, Paul McGuigan from Manchester and Darren Hoare from Australia, in a drunken brawl. But he feared the court would ignore his mental health problems.
They should have accepted the psychiatric reports, which they didn't. I think it was 3 top psychiatrists compiled a report stating that I suffer from advanced, not just PTSD, but APTSD, advanced post-traumatic stress disorder.
The judge ruled that Danny Fitzsimmons was fully responsible for his actions and found him guilty of murder. But he did consider his psychiatric history and gave him a life sentence. So, for his family, some relief, but still many worries.
It's just a tragedy for everybody. It's a tragedy for Danny, because Danny is now facing an awful long time in a horrendous situation. And really, we feel very strongly he shouldn't be there. He shouldn't have been allowed to go back into Iraq.
Danny Fitzsimons may have escaped with his life, but he still faces many uncertain years inside an Iraqi prison where, as a foreign security contractor, he could be subject to reprisals. So his family now plan to campaign for him to be allowed to serve his sentence back in Britain instead. After the verdict, Paul McGuigan's fiancée, Nikki Prestige, issued a statement saying she took some solace from the fact that Fitzsimons had been convicted of murder and not manslaughter. She insists the shooting was unprovoked. This case has raised worrying questions over the recruitment of private security guards who still wheel around the skies of Baghdad, heavily armed and lightly regulated. It has been a tragedy, both for the families of the victims and for this deeply troubled young man. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Baghdad.
The French fashion house Dior sacked its chief designer, John Galliano, after a video surfaced showing him hurling racist abuse at customers in a cafe. Police briefly detained Mr. Galliano last week after the couple accused him of making anti-Semitic remarks. The 50-year-old designer apologised for his behaviour in causing any offence, but said he'd been subjected to an alleged physical attack. Insurers were told they would no longer be able to charge different premiums for men and women because of their gender, following a ruling by the European Court of Justice. The decision will have a dramatic effect on the cost of car insurance for young women who've been paying far less than men because they're generally seen as a lower insurance risk. The decision also affects the cost of buying an annual pension. On Tuesday, an inquest was told how the mass murderer Derek Bird shot his twin brother David 11 times after confronting him in his bedroom. Derek Bird went on to kill 11 other people during a rampage in Cumbria last June. Danny Savage reports.
The full horror of what this 52-year-old taxi driver did here last June was outlined in detail. Derek Bird lived here in a... He started his killings by driving a few miles in that direction to murder his own twin brother, before passing back through this area and towards Whitehaven and beyond, where he murdered 11 more people, most of whom were complete strangers to him. And this is the shotgun he used, often calling his victims over to his car to ask the time, then shooting them in the face. He drove for miles through the countryside and towns of West Cumbria, firing randomly. His route was instantly traceable by the bodies he left in his wake. The inquest heard that Derek Bird shot his own brother David 11 times when he confronted him in his bedroom. He lay dead here for hours before neighbours found him. Bird then went on to shoot Kevin Commons, his solicitor, who lived here in Frizzington. But why? Derek Bird thought his first two victims were conspiring against him over a tax bill. His son Graham today told the inquest he thought he was being set up, that he would get arrested. But that still doesn't explain why Bird went on to kill so many strangers. Their deaths will be examined in the order they died, during an inquest that will last for a month. Danny Savage, BBC News, West Cumbria.
On Wednesday, David Cameron told Parliament that he did understand the plight of motorists facing soaring fuel costs, but he refused to say that he'd cut the level of tax which has contributed to higher fuel prices. This week, a big petition was handed into Downing Street calling for the tax on fuel to be reduced. Our political editor, Nick Robinson, has the story.
If he had to pay to fill up the tank of his own car, it would cost him well over £100 at today's prices. That's more than the average man or woman gets paid before tax for a whole day's work. No wonder then that after the Prime Minister had left for question time, a carload of angry motorists arrived to deliver a petition with 120,000 other names demanding a fair deal on fuel taxation.
We have a road economy in this country and it's time we admitted it, and we have to protect that economy and the recovery by stabilising fuel prices. Now, this is a time bomb waiting to go off.
The fuel price has certainly been ticking up, 15% in the past year. In November, the average UK price of a litre was £1.19. This month, it's already reached £1.30. Trouble in the Middle East could take that much higher, and then the tax rise due in April would add about another 5p a litre.
I know how difficult it is for motorists, particularly for small businesses and families, when they're filling up at the pumps and it's over £1.30 a litre. As we've said, we will look at the fact that extra revenue comes to the Treasury when there is a higher oil price and see if we can share some of the benefit of that with the motorists, something that the party opposite never did in all its time in government.
With the budget 3 weeks away today, the Treasury is still trying to work up a mechanism that means when the petrol price goes up, the duty is held down, and when the petrol price goes down again, the tax goes back up. It's called the fuel duty stabiliser. One big problem: get the number wrong and the country could lose hundreds of millions of pounds in tax revenue.
There's a simple political rule when it comes to petrol tax. Government puts it up and opposition's promised that they'd be the ones to cut it. The next fuel duty rise was actually planned when Labour were in power.
Petrol prices are incredibly high. The government's making it worse by putting up VAT. They should reverse their decision and act now to help motorists up and down the country.
Bear one thing in mind: if the government does tax petrol less, it'll simply have to look for something else to tax more instead. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Westminster.
The Home Secretary Theresa May told police officers that pay cuts were essential in order to minimise frontline job losses. She told police leaders she wanted officers' pay frozen for 2 years. Her remarks came ahead of an independent review of police wages and conditions to be published in a few days' time. St James's Palace launched a website to celebrate the marriage of Prince William and Kate Middleton. It will include links to important information for visitors on the day. The media company News Corporation, owned by Rupert Murdoch, was given the green light to take full control of Sky B. It came after News Corp offered to make Sky News a separate company, although it would still own a stake in it. This followed concerns about the size of Mr Murdoch's media empire. Here's our business editor, Robert Peston.
It's the media deal of the year, maybe of this century so far. The UK's biggest newspaper group, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, has been given the thumbs up by the government to buy all of the UK's biggest commercial TV group, British Sky Broadcasting. The takeover would represent something of a revolution in news. It would combine News Corporation's market-leading newspapers such as The Sun, The Times, The Wall Street Journal, among others, with British Sky Broadcasting's market-leading position in pay television. But perhaps the better way of seeing this is in terms of the colossal revenues of the combined group of £8.1 billion in the UK alone, which is more than double the licence fee revenues of its nearest rivals, that's the BBC by the way, of £3.5 billion. The huge editorial and financial clout of the combined businesses is what makes this deal so controversial, especially since Rupert Murdoch and his son James are famously friendly with political leaders all over the world. So, did the Culture Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, roll over to help the government's media pals, the Murdochs?
Not at all. It's precisely because of the concerns that people express about politicians being involved in this process that I have sought and published independent advice at every stage of the process, even when I didn't have to. This is a deal which means that James Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch, will have less control over news media in this country.
How on earth can the deal give less control to the Murdochs of news media? Well, they've agreed to spin off Sky News, the rolling 24-hour news channel, into a new company, which will be 39% owned by News Corporation and 61% by outside investors. Perhaps more importantly, its board will be dominated by independent directors and no News Corporation employee, no Murdoch, can chair Sky News. But not everyone thinks Jeremy Hunt has done the right thing by approving the takeover.
There's been a widespread campaign to urge him to refer
the issue to the Competition Commission. I think there's 250,000 people signed this petition. Over 100,000 now have written to him. He's ignored all that. He's ignored the original Ofcom recommendations, and he's handed over, well, effectively, near monopoly control of our British media in the long term to Rupert Murdoch.
But although this headline-grabbing deal has been politically sanctioned, it isn't done yet. It'll only happen if the Murdochs find the more than £9 billion price which Sky shareholders are likely to demand for their shares. Robert Peston, BBC News.
The fortunes of Britain's Liberal Democrat Party, who are part of the coalition government, took a dip in the Barnsley Central by-election. The Lib Dem candidate finished in 6th place after coming second